Hi,
Ta-da.
Addison. Good to see you
Rip
again, sir.
Roberts. Very good to see you too.
Let's get cracking. There's been so much that happened this week, and I don't know. Last week we called this section the weekly pulse, but something you mentioned this week was a really funny story around the word check-in. So I think we should change this segment to the weekly check-in, which of course sounds a little bit different coming from a New Zealand accent.
But only if I get to introduce it each week as the
Yes.
weekly chicken. I don't remember where I was. I think I was in California and I was talking to someone about traveling and I said, oh yeah, I'm packing my bags tonight. I've got 21 kilos of chicken. Excuse me? Where are you going? Why do you have 21 kilos of chicken? Yeah, chicken luggage, And it took a little while, and eventually we reached the conclusion that chicken sounds different when I say it. On
But
that
I'm still
note,
picturing like 23 kilos of like chicken feathers everywhere and like all the movement that comes with checking in that many chickens.
it's even worse when I picture it because I'm picturing like, you
Dead
know,
chickens.
dead chicken. I don't want to make it too graphic, but the kind that you would buy from a supermarket that's already been processed. Like,
I
how
like
many of those do you think?
plucked and frozen chickens. All
How
right. Well,
many can you fit in your suitcase? I wonder. I wonder how many places would be okay with you entering the country just with that many chickens.
I think, if you travel by bus in certain countries, that's fine. That seems to be like quite the norm in certain parts of Asia and South Central America. But I think we should move on from chickens and check-ins and actually start our weekly check-in. What do you think?
Our weekly chicken. Yeah, good. And maybe no more chicken talk, at least for a few weeks.
That sounds good to me.
All right, so for our chickens, we are going to mix it up a little bit. First on the docket, we've got just a little bit of a time stamping exercise. What have we both seen in the news? What's interesting? And just to preface this a little bit, I was listening to a Tim Ferriss podcast and he had different guests coming on. And I think this is attributed to Cal Newport, who wrote Deep Work. And he was talking about being a student of history and that when you read the news, everything seems like it's going to like blow up and there's all of this like
Mm.
crazy, unprecedented things. But if you're a student of history, you can quite quickly pick out like what the kind of rolling narratives are and what is really important and what's not important. And so in the spirit of the great spin up, I spun up a little tool that scans different news websites and then it takes the article headline and what the article's about and it does a quick deep dive into the history of that thing so that instead of reading the news article, you can read the history of that subject and decide whether or not it's.
So with that being the case, do you have a example that you could share with us this week for the news?
I can spin one up.
Like something that connects the release of DeepSeek 4 to the like the Gutenberg press? Or is that the kind of like trending thing that we're looking at here?
That's the kind of thing that I'm thinking about. And I think V1 is that we, with our news pieces, try and attach it to something that comes to mind in history. And maybe anyone that's listening can try to do the same thing, like attach the news piece to a part of history that they understand. Because everybody mediates the news through their own historical lens. Right?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I love this notion that the future doesn't repeat itself, but it certainly rhymes. I also love that there's a chicken in the background during this weekly check-in. Well, I mean, a rooster, but still. Yeah. So like this news section is really about distinguishing noise versus signal, and I think both of us are going to have a very different sense of what is noise and what is signal. So I'm very curious to get started on that, and I'd love to use your tool in this section as well. So I'm not sure if you can spin something up today, but in lieu of you maybe spinning something up in real time, I'm happy to start with a few pieces of news that I think signal, not noise. But I'm open to discussion on these points. One is
Yeah.
actually a really niche tool that came out called Flipbook. And it's this generative book interface where you can basically continue to explore content visually through a kind of a book format and the visual illustrations continue to generate. It's a little bit like, those images where you keep zooming in and zooming in and zooming in and zooming in, and you just go from a world to within a world to within a world to within a world. However, this is much more kind of illustrated and, there's context on either side as you go in. And So that was just released this week. I haven't had a chance to have a real play with it. However, I feel like it could be quite groundbreaking in terms of an interface for us to, well, for a lot of people to interact with. Just the sheer overwhelm of knowledge right now and data, having it in this really generative piece. And the fact that it can generate it really quickly, I find that really groundbreaking.
Do you think that I'm always curious if these things like lead us down a particular rabbit hole that is like it's giving us a particular lens on a piece of thing that you're clicking into, right? Or is it
Yeah,
quite broad?
I mean, so you can start with a specific prompt, but then it can also start quite broad. I kind of liken this to, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, I'm pretty sure it was a Chinese research student who created a map of the world and where all of the museum artifacts actually come from. So you could click on, for instance, the British Museum and see where all of the artifacts that are in the British Museum have actually come from around the world. It's incredible way of storytelling, and you being able to make up your own mind on perhaps how ethical these museums actually are, but then um, access the collections of museums, which physically are really overwhelming, but having maybe a digital interface where you can explore them in more of like a timeline sequence or through relevance to your location on the map could really be quite compelling. So yeah, what's one bit of news that kind of jumped
Mm-hmm.
out for you this week?
There are a couple of things that jumped out for me. One is I saw a graph that showed solar energy production. I believe it's worldwide on a 12-month rolling basis, overtaking the energy production of nuclear.
Mm,
And it reminded me of there's some stat, and I'm going to misquote this, but it's directionally correct. And it's like that the sun produces enough energy every minute to power the world for a year, something like that. Or at least that much energy hits the earth, and our ability to capture that energy is just a function of wanting to do it and producing the right things. And so
mm,
it's not that there's not enough energy, it's just that we're not utilizing it in the right way. And it comes back to this Bucky Fuller um, kind of paradigm of doing more and more with less and less. Like
mm,
there is plenty here. It's just how we kind of divert our attention and build the right things. And
mm.
yeah, yeah, I thought that was a
Yeah,
really
and like
interesting
the
step.
whole solar power piece is fascinating because you have the capturing of it, but then you've also got the storage and distribution of it. And I don't know, something I'm really excited by is a bunch of these autonomous vehicles actually becoming part of the grid that helps move this solar stored energy from place to place. So not only will it be moving humans, it could actually be moving energy to where it's needed as well, which just instead of all of these electrical cables everywhere, you have these batteries that get kind of dropped off and recharged and relocated, and yeah. And then much smaller energy generation systems on, so like in Bangladesh already, you've got these kind of smart grid solar systems where you have individual neighbors that put in their own panels, and then whatever they don't use for their household, it passes on to the neighbors. So you get these really resilient smart grids that aren't reliant on central grids anymore. I think we're going to see a lot more of that, and solar seems to be the most effective and cost-effective way to get there. So, exciting piece of news. Um,
Anything else pop out for you? We got
all right,
lag
so
again.
I'm not entirely sure about the implications of this, and it might just sound like another model release, so it might just be more noise. However, DeepSeek did just
Oh,
drop I think it was at a 1.5 trillion parameter open source model. Yeah, DeepSeek V4, which just in terms of context and capacity is just huge. So um, yeah, I'm excited by that, but I haven't quite figured out like what its capacity is on the back end. Like how good is it at using different tools? How is it at working across like multimodal contexts? How is it in terms of running locally versus being routed through comparative models as like complementary models as well. I'm starting to see there's a bit of a move in the industry towards being quite like token efficient. So a lot of devs are starting to use this idea of let's use a lesser model to kind of direct the more powerful model. So we'll default to, and it's a little bit like humans interacting with agents as well. Like we are basically at this point the lesser model of at least cognitive intelligence, giving direction to these models that have much more intellectual capacity based on its ability to pull in data and process it quickly. And so that approach seems to be working quite well with a lot of these model efficiency games as well. So again, I'm not sure I've quite distilled the signal from the noise there, but there's something that is quite compelling.
I see what you mean. I think it's an interesting conversation for a couple of reasons. It's like these models are getting better. Yes, they're getting more compact. I saw something in the news. There's a Google research team put out a paper about how they could compress a model essentially so that it could run on a phone or locally. And then a bunch of people went and reverse engineered it and made it open source. And maybe, and I don't actually know what the connection is, but maybe this is also what prompted DeepSeek to have this breakthrough. So like all of these AI researchers are doing this work up front to make the algorithms, make the models, make all of this stuff better. What does that mean for us? You can run things on smaller pieces of infrastructure, which means it's distributed more widely. The better we get at, or the better companies get at figuring out that those orchestration pieces are really important. And then from a larger, like kind of existential standpoint, it's like, all right, if we are approaching a time where humans are going to be how do I phrase this? Not the dominant form of intelligent life on the planet, then what's our role and how do we kind of interact with this thing? And I mean, we can get really philosophical, and I think that we should keep it in the practical here. But yeah,
Well,
it
actually,
reminds me.
just on that point, like like let's not go too deep into this. However, I did listen to a wonderful conversation on Nate Hagen's podcast, The Great Simplification, with Ian McGilchrist, and Ian McGilchrist was talking about this idea of external intelligence and internal intelligence, and he was talking about the distinction between, an AI can very easily tell you that the capital of France is Paris, and yet the AI won't really, and that's external knowledge. Yet the AI won't have the nuance on what it's like to live in Paris, and maybe it can tell you, blog reviews and different restaurants to eat, but still like that internal knowledge of actually living in a place, like that layer of intelligence, which is largely what brings so much richness to life, is not going to be replaced by AI, at least not anytime soon. And so I'm really excited by this idea of us maybe working with AI tools to help support our external knowledge and then allow us more time to kind of be in this internal sense of intelligence. And I guess another way of passing that is the difference between, being and doing. It's not hard to look around a lot of the way cultures are structured right now. There's a lot of doing, not too much being. And so balancing that out, I'm really excited about the prospects of that. And I think that brings us towards a more abundant society and cultures as well. So yeah, that's not good.
The way that, just to like round this out a little bit, the way it was described to me maybe yesterday or the day before, I was talking with this like wonderfully sunshiny person who was like very in the world, and we were talking about being on screens and just like the noise that you get from being on a screen, and there's all these things. And the way that they phrased it was that life on a screen, if you're like working on a screen or you're looking at your phone or anything like that, it's very flat. And when you're in the real world, the context is so much richer. It's like it's a nuance that's very hard to put on a screen, to put onto paper, but it's something that as a human, you can feel it. And I listened to Brian Johnson talk about his recent psychedelic trip that he was having trouble putting it into words. But one of the things that kind of stuck out to me is like, if you're someone who's ever done this, you will know what I mean, that I can't translate it into this medium of words because it's such a like rich experience. And he didn't describe it as a visual experience. He described it as like a consciousness, a raw consciousness. which I thought was really interesting, the richness of human experience. And it brings me to my last piece of news as well, which is I was reading about in a world where AI produces all of this stuff, like what is uniquely human? And the article was going into the uniquely human thing is the imperfection that we bring, the like uniquely human imperfection, and extrapolating this into like supply demand economics. If we're in a world that perfect things are produced like that at very low cost, the supply of those will be huge, and the supply of human imperfection will be limited by how much we produce imperfect things. So I kind of see a world that we're more interested in the like mistakes that people are making and the trying of things than the actual output. And this kind of comes into like things that are really useful for utility's sake. I really want a bus that gets me from A to B, or a train that gets me from A to B, or a plane that gets me from A to B properly without making a mistake. But that's not what I want in my art. That's not what I want in my music.
Totally. Yeah. I have, I bought a little tea set, a traveling tea set, and one of the cups broke. And I, very patiently, diligently, like used a little kintsugi kit to piece it back together. And when I offer people tea, I invite them to pick their cup, and they always go for the one that's been broken and mended before the one that is like perfectly rounded and shaped. Yeah, I think it speaks volumes for the fact that human character and I don't know, there's spending time in Portugal, I kind of talk about this idea of like the patina of neglect and time, and there's something that brings a real richness and character with it. So yeah, I don't think that's going to go out of fashion anytime soon. Let's move on to the next section of the weekly chicken, which
Sounds good.
is tools. Oh, sorry.
Tools. In the background, spun up the history of, if you want to
Great. Yeah,
see it
let's.
briefly.
Well, speaking of tools and news, what a great bridge. What do you got for us?
So I'm going to share my screen briefly. Here we are, share. Can you see this?
I can. And so for anyone that's
Nice.
listening, we have about the history of kind of editorial news style website that's just emerged. Can you focus
So
through the rest? What do we got here?
we've got, this scrapes a bunch of different news articles and then pulls them in so that you can go to one and you can try to get the history of it. And looking at this, the news is pretty fucking dire.
I mean, the news, when isn't the news dire? Or at least, mainstream news.
All right, let's look at this one. Early care scheme could prevent thousands of miscarriages a year. That sounds like it could potentially has a positive outcome. So you click on the article link, it takes you to the article. It's got a link to the original article that I'll open in the background, and then it's searching for a historical record. So what this is doing in the background is it's querying LLM via an API. Then it's going and taking a prompt and its own reasoning to figure out how it should understand the history of this thing. And then it's generated these are the key moments that we should look at. So it's gone back to 1897. Scientists discover a corpus luteum's, the corpus luteum's role. Then 1934, progesterone isolated and synthesized. So this is, I don't think that this is like 100% accurate, or I would like background research some of this stuff, but it's given us a timeline of scientific discoveries and where this fits in. And then it's got recurring patterns throughout history and why it matters now.
So basically,
And
everything that we've learned about pregnancy over the last 200 years.
Yeah. And I think the interesting part about this is probably how you configure it in the back end. And I think this is probably a pretty good V1. But
Incredible.
I was thinking about how to improve this and decided not to spin the cycles on it, not to like go and do it, but to tap into who has been doing the research on a particular subject and then follow their line of reasoning and the topics that they think are interesting. Because there are so many experts out there that have spent their lives going into different kind of subjects and have different frames on pieces of information and tools. And like, there are political experts, there are scientific experts, there are all of these people that if you just give it to an LLM, it's going to give you a very generalized interpretation of what the thing is based on all the information. If we can direct it to the frame that some experts have, I think that's a more interesting way to approach it. So yeah, tool for understanding headlines, and then specifically tools that we have been using this week. So
what have you been exploring? What new tools have you been exploring this week?
Okay, so I'll intro this by talking a little bit about the way that we've been working. And one of my favorite things is this co-opetition, these sprints that we've been having. Just to give a little bit of context, we have been working in sprints so that we can time box our ability to produce things and kind of condense the time to get output. And every week we do at least one of these co-opetition sprints where we say, all right, here's a topic, here's a thing that we want to explore. And then both River and I will go off and spend 45 minutes trying to come up with the best version of that thing, like a prototype or a way to approach something or like a new way to do something. And out of one of these, we decided to spin one on voice agents. So as a mode of interacting with an agent, could we do it through voice? And so we both went and spun up these voice agents and used different ones. And I'm finding that Gemini Flash Live is really interesting. Specifically right now, it's 3.1 and it's in the preview mode. And what distinguishes this from other voice chat agents is most agents have this thing called TTS, which is where you will speak to a model or speak to one tool. It will take that transcript and write it out. Then it will send that to a model. Then the model will process it, just like a chat model, ChatGPT or Claude or whatever it is, DeepSeek. Then that will spit back a output, and then that output will be spoken out loud by another tool.
Yeah, you got STT and then TTS, speech to text and then text to speech, which sounds a bit tedious if you're the model as well. Can you imagine? So what's different about this Gemini model?
So the Gemini model takes into account, apparently, all of the nuance of a conversation, and it's able to understand what the user intends by the way that they're expressing something. Wow. There's a big difference between, this is terrible. The only example that comes to mind is, let's eat grandma and let's eat grandma.
God, where did you come that? But is that a Kiwi thing, or like where did you come up with that one?
It's one of those, like, if you don't understand grammar or you don't understand intonation, things become very different. But yeah, this model is interesting for a couple of reasons. The response time is much better, and it seems to ingest nuance in a better way. So if I am talking to it, and I've been testing it a little bit, if it can hear in my voice that I'm frustrated, it will give a slightly different answer to if you just give that in text, because there's so much lost in text. And I think this is true for like human to human communication as well. I don't really like texting. How do you find this communication layer? Do you text with people much, or do you call, or do you voice note?
I mean, look, I think most people in text message both over communicate and under communicate. I think text should really just be for scheduling, and voice notes, use sparingly. Anything under 3 minutes is anything over 3 minutes is definitely pushing the limit of that format. Yeah, so I much prefer
podcast territory.
Actual phone calls or catching up in person, and then using these communication forms as like ways to organize and make time to meet up. I'm excited. Like I had a quick play with what you were able to spin up with this as well, and it was just incredible. I mean, let's make this public, but you definitely won that competition with what you were able to spin up in 45 minutes. You were able to basically pull up a website where it had a mobile phone dashboard on it that you could push the call button and start talking to this thing straight away. And not only in English, I think it was in 140 languages. Within 45 minutes, we're testing this out in as many languages as we know how to speak, at least a few words. Crazy.
Yeah, exactly. And even the nuance between Portuguese, and Brazilian Portuguese. I'm going to fact check you here. From what I read, this one is 70 languages. And then we were also talking about the new Grok model that came out that is voice. And I think that does 25 languages or 20 languages, something like that. So big jump for distribution. I know the distribution is something that we talk about quite a lot.
Yeah, even distribution
Access.
of these technologies to the entire global population. Yeah, super exciting. All right.
I've
played around a little bit this week with ChatGPT's Image 2.0, and I really haven't used ChatGPT at all since it really came out. I kind of saw it as like the mass market kind of superficial layer of these tools, to be honest. But I did start playing around with Image 2.0 largely because it showed capacities with like interface design and dashboard design, and being able to take quite complex reports and work with those. And I have to say, compared to some of the tools I'm using for user interface design, like Google Stitch and Variant and a few others, I've found this really quite compelling, largely because its ability to edit very specific things, its ability to understand direction and prompts much better, and its ability to get text accurate. Yeah, I'm still quite new at it, but definitely something worth exploring a little bit more. Yeah. Any other tools this week that you started to play with?
Things did spend a few. I spent like an hour this morning trying to get a special guest on, trying to get this voice agent into our call today, and I got it working briefly, but it's very touch and go, and you realize the nuance.
You're building a very touchy.
It was very touch and go. It joined, but the nuance of like getting, say, a voice agent into a conversation like this, specifically using Riverside, there's a few connecting pieces, including how long the agent works for, how it times out in the background, getting it to connect to a microphone and a speaker, getting it to be able to log in. Then there's also legal implications, like does putting a voice agent into a service like this violate the terms and services? Like there's just all of this kind of complexity that is noise compared to just like being able to use it. I
am aware of this tool and I haven't used it yet, but I think it's called Get Pickle, or it's maybe just called Pickle. And basically, what it does is you can be on your phone just with voice, and then it will send in a visual avatar for your meeting call. So you're still talking, but it's showing a visual of you. So it's kind of like this split avatar almost. So I'd be curious to see if that's something that is illegal or not based on the terms of services of some of these tools.
That technically is not so hard to do, because like what Riverside is doing right now is it's asking my computer, all right, where do I find the input? Where do I put the output? And where do I find the input? And where do I put the output for video and for audio? So the audio gateway going back and forward is kind of complicated. The video gateway, like what you're talking about, Get Pickle, probably just instead of asking your computer to use your webcam, is just saying, where should I send this? And Get Pickle says, send it to this display, and it shows the avatar, right? And a little bit of a creepy side note is that when you have your webcam and there's the little light next to it, there's like one function that turns the webcam on, and there's another function that turns the light on. And it's possible to, if some kind of malicious agent, to turn on the webcam without turning on the light. So we think that they're connected, but like all of this stuff in the background is just all of these function calls to operate different parts of hardware.
Well, I don't know. When we were talking about that tool just before, I just picture our next episode all being in cartoon. So it would be like cartoon versions of this for the whole chat, or at least for a section of it.
That'll be
Anyway,
interesting.
maybe again a superficial thing. Let's move on to the next section of the weekly chicken, which is building. Yeah, like what have we been building this week? Because it kind of plugs it ties in quite nicely with the tools. But what are we actually? What have we built? What have we been building? What are the updates?
I'm gonna toss this one to you to do a check-in on Hermes and to be just as blunt as we can about it, because last week in the episode we talked about setting it up and we talked about using it. And we
Yeah,
have done that
sure.
a little bit.
So with the Hermes agent specifically for helping us as a kind of COO for our venture studio, I don't know about you, but I've put like a little bit of time each day, maybe like half an hour into it by asking it different prompts and basically troubleshooting a bunch of the different system setups. So, it's still not quite processing images as well as I'd like. It can process voice, both input and output. I've started to send it a few things to ingest, like I share details about our podcast and its memory on us and the podcast, and pulling transcripts of the first episode of that. So the kind of wiki LLM is working. I've done a bunch of additional research on like where the wiki LLM actually breaks in terms of our usability for it, and where maybe alternative memory systems might support. So like if we scaled our studio to, let's say, 5 people, or even if it was like us and 6 agents, and there was a lot of input from different sides, then the wiki LLM kind of breaks. It works really well if it is a little bit more from like a researcher context. So a little bit like what you actually just spun up for the news piece. If you're trying to kind of write each article so it kind of largely stays the same, it works really well. But if you're constantly updating it, you end up maybe producing more than is necessary. I've found that you have a reluctance to kind of interact with it, and it's a little overwhelming. I've set up a few cron jobs, so I think when you first go into this Telegram group, you see the topics and you see maybe like 10 or 15 messages in each of them, and it's kind of hard to know where to maybe interact with it. So I am seeing how to make maybe the topics a little bit more obvious, and also maybe the cron jobs, whether they're daily or weekly, to be just high signal and less noise. But yeah, I'd say it probably requires just a little bit of streamlining. Also, because I'm using Open Router and a bunch of the just open free models, I'm finding some of the APIs are timing out or not connecting anymore. So I need to improve the smart routing piece. So this works well. And I think what I'll do this week is set up a local fallback model on the VPS. So we'll always have something that can work, even if it is maybe like one of the Gemma models, which is people starting to run on phones quite effectively. So yeah,
Cool.
that's my
Interesting.
update on Hermes. And perhaps we should give it a different name at some point. But until he's a valued member of the team, I think he's a Hermes agent for now. What about you?
Just to comment
Or
on
maybe
that,
you
yeah, I do have a little reluctance to using it. And I think this is the same for lots of technology, even for my personal emails, WhatsApp messages, all of these things. When there's too much going on, I feel overwhelmed, and so I'm not going to touch it. But this is like perfect user testing. It's like I go in and the messages to the bottom one and read the bottom one for a couple of different channels. And so I think this week, if I just, no matter what the feeling is, go in and try to use it a little bit more. This is habit formation as well, right? It's like, yeah, there's the tool, and also changing the way that we do things is an inherently difficult thing for most people. Sometimes you just got to go and do it again and again and again. And I know this for myself. I have built habits successfully, but they just take a little bit of effort.
Yeah, totally. And look, the idea of this tool is that it is something that is self-learning and self-improving. And I have actually found that its ability to kind of self-repair is pretty incredible. You still need to prompt it to self-repair. Unfortunately, you can't self-repair the self-repair. However, that does seem to be changing with the different updates, like its ability to really do more and more, and its ability to do skills. And I got its ability to browse websites and pull out transcripts and things like that working really well. So yeah, at least for now, like there's some strong capabilities that Hermes has that I don't think we've quite pushed to the limits. But yeah, can you
Nice.
walk us through maybe the project that ultimately emerged from the voice agent.
The voice agent. Yeah.
So we have a new
Cool.
venture this
So
week from our competition.
we have a new venture, and yeah, this was born from the competition, and basically it's called Hours. You can see it at gethours.org, and if you go there right now, it's a work in progress. We're building the rocket ship as it's taking off. Talking about this will also kick us into gear to get the gates and everything working properly. But basically, Get Hours is an agent that you can talk to if you're SME, if you're a small or medium-sized business in any of 70 languages. And essentially what it does is it interviews you as a business owner, as an operator, and then it takes that information and it runs it through a back-end process that does research and understands what the problems are in your organization, and then what AI tools are out there that could save you time, hence Get Hours. And this is an effort to distribute the tools, or distribute the knowledge of the tools that we have, because like it's ridiculous that people are not using all of these amazing tools that are out there. And so this process, it walks through this process, it gives us recommendations for the business, and then we go and verify all of the tools and produce a report and send it back to the business with an option to follow up and to walk them through how we would set these things up. Because this is, a lot of these tools are just bread and butter for a lot of people. They're just like I wouldn't think about joining a team meeting without a recording agent on the call, because the value of it is so great. And there are tools that are free even, that frees you up to do other things, to like really be there present for the conversation, to, if you have questions about it, instead of having to like go and take meticulous notes, you can go to the transcript and you can Command F and search for a word and pull out exactly what you wanted, or you can take the transcript and you can put it into an LLM and you can ask for the action items, or you can ask for the details on a specific plan that you were talking about. Just like the quick wins here, and also the larger time back pieces. So obvious to you and I, but to a lot of people, they haven't even heard of half the tools. There's something like, I don't know, you were doing the research on this, right?
There's roughly 50,000 AI tools that have emerged in the last couple of years. A platform called There's an AI for That is a very good kind of roundup of them all. And it's overwhelming, even as we're quite deep into this, it's so overwhelming to see what's there. And as a small, medium business, like, you still need to keep doing, and you need systems that aren't going to fail. So, and it's so easy to get stuck in these small, like one of the first lessons I ever learned studying entrepreneurship is work on the business, don't work in the business. And yet that's something that a lot of small and medium business owners get kind of stuck in, and they're still doing the same repetitive tasks. So the whole idea of Hours is to help free up those repetitive tasks with some very well reviewed and strong tools that have a good community around them. So they're kind of well vetted. Help. And we think we can probably, on average, reclaim maybe 10 hours a week with some of these tools for small, medium businesses. And then what does that open up? What possibilities does that open up? I was listening to a talk from a neuroscientist this week, and he was talking about the difference between a vicious and virtuous friction. And so the vicious friction is like maybe some of the admin tasks that after you do it, you feel really drained in energy. And the virtuous friction is maybe, something that feels a little hard to start off with, but once you've done it, you actually feel like you've grown in some way. And so without using, vicious and virtuous friction as a terminology, that's part of the thinking underpinning Hours as well. So getting more people to focus on like what actually is really high impact and high leverage from them, what could be delegated, and then also what could be automated through some of the tools. So those are the three kind of buckets we're focusing on right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anything else we've been building you want to discuss?
I just add to that quickly that
Sure.
there's 50,000 tools. A lot of them aren't very good. Having somebody curate this stuff we have different methods for like finding the best tools to use. And my friends tease me because I'm always finding tools for things. "Oh, do you know that there's a tool for that? Oh, I'm going to build a tool for that." There's all of these tools, and the variation in like some of them are commoditized, some of them are just like work really well and it's really easy. Some of them are really not good, and some of them are really specific to a use case. So, like having methods for finding the right tools and having them tested and having other people recommend them, especially.
Yeah, right tools at the right time, super important. And I was just thinking, like when you're physically building something, like a table, and when you have the wrong tool or you're not using it the right way, there's immediate feedback. There's immediate friction. Like you're not actually able to cut the wood, or you're not able to actually connect the pieces. But then once you find the right tool and use it the right way, it's just like magic. And it's a little bit harder, a little bit more nuanced, obviously, with some of these digital tools. But I think that's definitely what we're going for. And then again, like making this accessible, because so many of these tools are really just kind of focused on English speaking, kind of San Fran, Austin, Boston, and how can we make these more accessible and more straightforward to start implementing. And yeah, I don't know about you, but I love the idea of supporting all of the cafes and plumbers and massage parlors and all these like small businesses, and just help free them up with some of their time, so they could actually maybe spend more time with their family, or spend more time like building something else new themselves. Yeah, less of this vicious fiction, more of this virtuous stuff. So more virtuous hours out there. Like it's very much in line with our idea of like creating more abundance, time abundance. So I'm very curious to see like how many hours, within like let's say 12 months from now, how many hours have we helped reclaim from small medium businesses around the world? Crazy, yeah.
Yeah.
Super excited.
Yeah. We
Yeah,
should have
any
a
other
running
builds you
metric.
feel like we should talk about? We could also move on to the next section, or rabbit hole.
Builds. I'll touch quickly on what we're doing just kind of for the studio and the back end part of our dashboards and ventures. It's very clear that like there are some tools that we could use as well. Project management, some CRM capabilities, some way of like having a heads up display. You know how planes have a heads up display so that you can see altitude, you can see all these things. Having a way when we've got our attention spread between different things, having basically a metrics dashboard. So that's what I was building out yesterday. Specifically a couple of metrics that we were talking about, like venture velocity or build velocity. How fast can we take something from having an idea to it being in the real world and having users? I think the voice agent was a pretty cool use case. It's been maybe cumulatively not cumulatively, maybe 4 hours each, maybe 8 hours total to get that to the point that it is. And I would guess that it's probably another couple of hours each to get it like out into the world, and at least with the first users to test, having that as a metric that we can then look at the ventures that we're building and how much time and energy is going into them and what we're learning from each of them as we go.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think this is a really interesting one, largely because it started as a competition. The other ventures we've kind of spun up of kind of being these longer ideation processes, and whereas this one was like, all right, here's a thing, here's a market, let's just build for it. And so, yeah, I kind of love this idea of collaboration and competition, but bringing them together like seems to be a really fascinating place.
Yeah. And it's scratching our own itch as well. Like, I think that is a really interesting place to start is, okay, well, we have these ventures. We obviously need to be able to distribute. We need to be able to allocate our time properly. How do we do that? And I've noticed as well, I don't know if you've noticed this, but the clarity of thinking that I have when I don't go directly to an LLM and actually I sit down with a notebook or with just a notes app and I type out some specific ideas that I have, because it's based on the exact outcome that I want versus, maybe we get into this a little bit later, but I mean, it's a good segue into rabbit holes actually, is how these generative systems just take us in all these different directions. You ask ChatGPT, you ask Claude, you ask Kimi for a plan to do something. It'll give you a 9-step plan almost without fail. And it might be like, how do I pour myself a glass of water? It could be get glass, turn on tap, you know? They'll give you a 9-step plan for it. um, yeah. So just point being that building this thing, this dashboard, means that we can pull in metrics that we want. Like right now, I've got subscriber metrics, I've got user metrics, like website browsing metrics from our different ventures. And also an interesting point is making the decision to not pull in all of the information into this place. It's like, yeah, we can do the work to like get all of the website analytics into our internal dashboard, but actually let's have a real heads up display that is a simplified version of that so that we can see some conversion metrics, but we don't need to have every single metric there. I think that is a job for a particular role. Like if you're a marketing person, yeah, being able to go and see the nuance of a funnel is really important. If you're a founder, if you're a CEO, if you're an operator, you don't need to always see every single metric. You want to know what it means. You don't want to, the adage that I like is you don't need to know how a magician does their trick to be wowed by the magic. Reminds me of your phrase, can we make it happen just automagically? I like it.
Yeah, right. Let's go further down the rabbit holes. Yeah, I think obviously these generative tools are very susceptible to keeping you in rabbit holes, which is also why I actually think one of the lessons for both of us has been if we have these 45-minute sprints, even if we end up in a rabbit hole, there's kind of like a extraction point every 35 minutes where we feel compelled to unabashedly share like what's happened or what hasn't happened or what rabbit hole we may have got stuck in. This week I got stuck in a pricing strategy rabbit hole between my Kimi 2.6 and Perplexity Pro, and man, it's kind of soul destroying getting stuck in it because I feel like there's some like human intuition towards it, and then you want to research like well, actually maybe what is the current market doing? What are the what is the industry doing? What is maybe the value of what we're building, et cetera, et cetera? And just piling those on top of each other ended up being a real rabbit hole. And yeah, pricing is also one of those. I don't know about you, but it feels like it's kind of like an internal piece as well. How much should we charge? How much value are we generating? And there's kind of this balance between pricing something so that it actually has the value that it like the same thing could be priced really cheaply, but because it's priced cheaply, the market doesn't value it in a way in which it's actually worth, and then therefore the information isn't treated with kind of maybe the credibility that um, it needs to. So like in this particular instance, we're building a pricing strategy for land book and land library. This information does largely inform land parcels that are worth anything from 100,000 euros to 10 to 15 million euros. Being able to inform your decision making around this asset, which for most people is the largest asset they'll ever own, and also show additional layers of value, which you may have never considered with that asset. So looking at the natural capital of the land that you might be looking to buy or the land that you already have, and then not only seeing a snapshot of that natural value in terms of soil, in terms of water access, in terms of like the risks, fires, floods, drought, erosion, and then seeing at least directionally correct pathways towards increasing the value of that property as well. Hugely powerful information, but you could see that if you charged, $50, that wouldn't necessarily carry the weight for a real estate agent or for a landowner to be like, oh, well, let me act on this information. Whereas if it costs, like a professional land surveyor in most parts of the world will cost somewhere between, 2 to 10,000 euros for one of these like reports from an actual human. So, and you feel like I'm compelled to act on that a little bit more. So that was one of the rabbit holes. I don't I still don't quite have a clear answer, but I'll maybe next week I can report on that. But that was definitely one of the rabbit holes I caught myself in. And also, like physically, the embodied experience of finding yourself in a rabbit hole, I feels quite exhausting. So yeah, could have also been part of the. It was like one of the later sprints in the day, so it could have also been part of. Maybe we're more susceptible to falling into rabbit holes in those later sessions, after lunch and
Yeah.
before the man period. Period.
There-
Which actually, now that I mentioned it, I feel like I should describe what a man period is. And I actually
yeah.
only just recently discovered this myself, but women operate on a lunar cycle, which is 20 days or whatever, and men operate on a solar cycle, which is 24 hours. And for a lot of men, that kind of like dip in energy typically happens around like 3 to 7 p.m. And that's when like deep emotional conversations shouldn't be had, and maybe like important decisions shouldn't be made. Perhaps that's kind of the rabbit hole zone for deep work as well. I definitely want to be more mindful of that. Something I've found, at least in my experience over the last couple of years, which I've naturally done anyway, even though I didn't necessarily have this notion of the man period, is having a nap during that period of the day. And I like to travel with a hammock, and just 15, 20 minutes. It's kind of like half meditation, half like just daydream and creative space. That's a bit of my cure for that period.
Yeah. Yeah. It's super real, I'll say, and something can be real without us noticing it. Like I wasn't aware of kind of hormone cycles properly until I'm in my 30s, and there's also so there's hormones. There's also blood sugar levels, and there's some amazing experiments about the specific experiment is, but it's about parole being granted or not being granted, and
Oh yeah, after lunch.
after lunch, yeah, right after breakfast. So like, there's a crazy data curve that goes like X number of paroles are granted right after breakfast, like 9, and then it starts to dip down until 12 o'clock, and then the levels of parole that are granted come right up after lunch, and then they dip down like that. So like, if you're in this process and your fate is determined by at what point in the day the parole officer gets to your case. It's crazy. But it's also data that supports this. It's like, let's be mindful of our
Totally.
hormonal cycles, and for women too, and realize that they're very different cycles. And to like, I think the more you see something in yourself, the more you can recognize it in other people, or just understand it without having to have a judgment about it.
Yeah, yeah.
The other thing that comes up to take us back to the pricing conundrum, rabbit hole, there's like things that are worth different to different people at different times, right? And I'll take water as an example. For the most part, free out of a tap. You go to a supermarket, a little bit more expensive. You go to a gas station, more expensive. You go to an airport, more expensive, right? So it's a function of supply demand.
You go to a desert, just priceless.
Yeah. You go to, what is it, Arrakis in June? But
was that a June reference?
Yeah, it was a June reference.
Arrakis, brilliant. I thought you said Arrakis in June, like in the month of June, not in the film of June.
I think actually, I don't know what the seasons on Arrakis are like. But anyway, point being that for different people, things should be priced differently is a stance that I am willing to take on this, because yeah, if I want an outcome, or if I want a decision, or if I want information on a certain thing, then I will pay what I think it's worth. But if somebody is trying to give me something that I don't need at the time, if I'm about to catch a flight and somebody's trying to give me, a telescope, I don't really want a telescope. So I think the lesson here for us, at least, is like getting really clear every time on who it's for, and we're getting better at this, and at what point in the life cycle of their land purchase or ownership, or if they're an agent, at what point it's most interesting for them, being aware of what their workflows are as well. Like, I know that for my own workflow, if somebody tries to give me a burger in the morning, I'm fasting until whatever time. So I'm not going to be interested no matter what. So like, it's also having this internal knowledge versus having the external knowledge. We have the ability to have nuanced knowledge about what people's work flows are like, which an AI can do the research, but it will come up, it will just give us an answer. So a rabbit hole that I found myself in this week.
Can I just add one very last piece on the pricing bit? Because
Yeah.
it's a tension that I was really stuck with as well. We talk about like building towards this abundant future. And when I was exploring this pricing piece, what did come up is like, well, if we price this really low so everyone can access it, then it becomes kind of a commodity, which is great. Like I feel like everyone should have access to this land information. And then yet like if you don't price it high enough, it's not kind of valued enough. So people aren't interested in it. And it kind of reminds me a little bit of, there's a king in France who I think it was a point of famine, and they were trying to figure out how to feed the population. And this is when like potatoes had just recently been introduced to Europe and like a great source of sustenance for the society. And rather than like giving these potatoes out to the farmers for free, they put it in a special palace garden with high fences, and then the potatoes were stolen. And the fact that the potatoes were stolen became this thing that then spread like wildfire. Like, oh my God, these are the really valuable potatoes in the king's garden that were stolen and then have been distributed, which might also tell you something about the mentality of the French in general. But there's something to like perceived value, and then like so that's the tension that I was exploring in the pricing there as well. And I don't have an answer for it, but I think we should be mindful as people that are building tools to make these accessible in a way that are still valued as well. And so that's definitely an open question for me as well. Sorry, what was the rabbit hole you were going to mention?
Now I'm pulled back into this. I want to talk about this for a second. Mostly because I love this stuff. I study economics, and one of my favorite topics is behavioral economics. And whether or not we are aware of it, we value everything that we do in a day. We value our time at a certain rate. And when we're talking about behavioral change, specifically, if you give somebody a book, they're not necessarily going to read it. If they have to go and spend $30 to buy a book, I have then valued that thing at a certain rate, and I don't want to waste it, even though it's the same information if somebody gives it to me or if I buy it. So I'm going to put more investment into it. And in economics, there's this thing, the sunk cost fallacy. And it's a fallacy because at least the way I understand it, and if I'm getting this wrong, I would like somebody to tell me. But the way I understand it is that if you're investing, say you invest a day into learning a skill, then the next day you have the decision to continue learning that skill that you learned or to switch and learn something new. And the fallacy is that people think that they should continue to invest in the thing that they've been investing in because they've already put money into it, because they've put time into it, because they've put investment into it. But actually, the learning from that is that at every point you should look at what is the most valuable thing for me to do. If switching and learning a new skill in the present, and to discard the sunk cost that you put into this thing. I think that like understanding how humans behave and how we are going to value something as a user and then adopt it into our workflow, choose to put the time and effort in to change our habit, change our behavior. Like I was talking about using the voice age, I know that is just a certain amount of investment that I need to put into it, and it doesn't need to be overwhelming. It just needs to be consistent, and eventually I will literally train myself to use that tool and I will get a bunch out of it. But maybe you should charge me. Maybe you should charge me to use the Telegram bot, and then I would use it more.
All right, great, done. Yeah, but I love that we're getting in a rabbit hole about a rabbit hole.
Okay.
I think I actually think this is a point of this is the idea of Homo economicus, right? And a lot of this behavioral economics is pretty set in stone, but even that is set in the past way that we think about economics. And as we move towards a more abundant future, again, how do we work with, how do we provide tools in a way that is still valued, but maybe not necessarily financially valued. Yeah, this is still a point that I think is really worth exploring. And there's a whole bunch of knowledge on like nonprofits as well, because it turns out that that doesn't work out really well either. There's the old story of some of the like Tom shoes, right, where you have people in the Western world buy a pair of shoes, and then a pair of shoes gets given to a community in Africa, for instance. But what that does is it floods the market with free shoes, and these shoes aren't actually really made for the market in which is receiving them. And then if you're a local businessman who's trying to actually sell shoes, you're out of business then. So from a Western perspective, it feels great. Oh, I buy a shoe, I give a shoe. Like, what a great concept. But, if you look at the whole life cycle and the economic system underpinning it, it actually creates more negative consequences than positive ones. It's like these third, fourth order consequences are something that I think we should be considering as we build and share these tools. Yeah, again, definitely open questions. All right, let's move along. What's one of your rabbit holes or open
Let's move
questions?
along. This morning, my rabbit hole was going to this voice agent. I was drinking coffee and I was thinking about recording this podcast, and I was thinking, like, we built a voice agent. I wonder if I could port it into the conversation. We could have it join and have a little discussion, and then it could leave. So I got home and I started building it, and 10 minutes turned into half an hour, turned into almost an hour of like trying to troubleshoot and get it working. And actually, like, a really good habit that I've started cultivating for myself is knowing that when I'm working with AI tools, every time I say something, like, I have this human need to even correct it and be like, oh, why? That seems so overly complicated. Why would you do it like that? Isn't there an easier way? Like, giving any kind of prompt, any kind of feedback is going to just volley it back to me. Like, it's like we're playing tennis, and the way that I got out of the rabbit hole is like I type the message, and then it's like I'm going to hit the tennis ball, and I go, no, if I send this, it's just going to give me something back. I'm just going to close the window. So the rabbit hole was like going into building this voice agent and then deciding to not send another message.
Oh, that's such an important piece. Like, when to stop engaging with an agent or a bot. Like, when is done. Or maybe it's like a positive constraint around you can only prompt it each session 5 times or something.
Yeah, exactly.
I think we got it right. Ruthie agrees.
Dog agree.
All right, let's move on. Any open questions?
Open questions for me right now. Nothing popping to mind. I'd like to touch back on this pricing piece. I know I've read a couple of articles that are not coming to me right now, but are about, like, in this world that we're moving into, that the pricing is part of the product or is the product. I know that this has been the case for a long time when they talk about product marketing, but I think that the pricing of something will become a much bigger role in product development, and it's just such a big topic that I think becomes really interesting, especially in a post scarcity world, which I hope we will enter in the next little while, in the next 5 years, potentially sooner. But if you think about a world that, and I guess this is really an open question, will we make it there? But a world that has cheap, abundant energy, that has abundant intelligence. So if there's an AI or an AGI or an ASI, whatever it is, that I say, hey, I get too hot when I go to the beach. Can you figure out how to not make that happen? And it comes up with a sunscreen that I can put on, and I can be in the sun all day, and it's whatever. Stupid example, but you know what I mean. Like, a world in which there's intelligence that I can just ask questions and these things get solved. What does that look like? Yeah, big open question. How about for
That's a
you?
big open question. The one that comes to mind is whether or not we should invite someone else to join either our studio or one of the ventures in terms of helping with go to market and kind of outreach. Like, although we're both more than capable of doing that, it doesn't really seem to be something that lights either of us up. And I think there's any number of tools that we could also start to work with or build ourselves to support that. But I do have an open question around if it's worth actually bringing someone else in. There's this idea that, or at least maybe this is a story or an assumption I have in my head, the more people we add at this stage, the more complicated it gets, because which is kind of ridiculous, but I kind of know what to expect from the different tools that we're using, like the output, and you can be quite specific with it. But humans are very emotional and very kind of erratic and prone to make mistakes and all of these things. And then the process of managing people, it's not quite where I want to put my energy either. So yeah, that's one of my open questions right now. Having said that, if you are listening or watching and you think you'd be interested in exploring something with us, then definitely reach out. Definitely open to having
absolutely.
some initial conversations and going from there.
So think about positive constraints, which
Yes.
is
All
the
right.
next thing
Deep
on the
dive.
docket.
All right. We got it.
Deep dive.
So that was the weekly check-in. It was really quick.
Just a quick hour 20.
Just a quick weekly check-in. All right. Next segment on the docket. Are we calling this the deep cut?
I don't know.
I'm not about deep dive or deep cut.
Yeah, deep dive's better.
Deep dive.
Again, this is building the rocket ship as it takes off and letting an AI name things.
Well, I kind of like a deep cut as well, right? Like that's at least. I mean, I'm not a DJ, but I feel like that's a DJ term, like a deep cut. Or is that like a? Yeah. I'm pretty sure that's a like when they really cut a beat. I don't know what I'm talking about. I should stop. now.
No, I love it when you go into fields that so
the deep dive today is on positive constraints.
Yeah. Do you want to tee this up?
Yeah, so I think we've kind of spoken about it across a bunch of different points, even today. But this idea of a constraint, a lot of times we think is a negative thing. Oh, like I can't do this is a constraint, or I can't go there. This is terrible. But actually, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that if you define positive constraints, you end up in a really, really good space. One of the ones that I use quite often is this idea of a Vipassana retreat. So the Vipassana retreat is the positive constraint is sit in 10 days in silence. Anyone can come, but because I've put this one positive constraint, it becomes a very self-selecting mechanism. And then what emerges from like just really one simple constraint, 10 days in silence, all of these things emerge from, and the community that arrives, the community supports, and then each individual experience from that. I mean, from a one sentence positive constraint, there's been so much that's emerged from that. So with that being the case, like I think there's some broad categories of positive constraints. So a constraint on time, a constraint on activity or behavior. In like venture building terms, we could put a constraint on like a target market or a target audience. We could also put a constraint on a feature or a number of features. Yeah, I feel like those are things that I've already started to explore, but maybe even as part of this deep dive, we could hatch another positive constraint for maybe both of us as a studio or individually, or maybe a little bit of both.
Yeah, I like this. And specifically this one that we talk about, target market, it brings us back to the pricing conversation, the water. Like if you are selling water, it's very hard to sell it from a tap. You need a lot of infrastructure. If you set up a little stall in a airport, then you can sell water for a lot. So like knowing the market that you're playing in is quite an interesting positive constraint. And it's not necessarily about pricing always, right? Like constraining ourselves to a particular market means that maybe we'll only be interacting with people that we really feel encouraged to interact with, or constraining ourselves to a certain target market might mean that we have this deep knowledge then of that market, which becomes an edge. And I mean, we both have experience in a lot of different things in a lot of different places. And then there are things that we both would have zero experience in. So like maybe those are markets that the positive constraint is just, let's not play in those markets and let's not waste our time doing that. So time, should we start there? We do have a couple of positive constraints around time. The ones that come to mind for me is that we are doing our work in sprints. And this is based on this idea that if you have an hour to do something or a week to do something, you will fill that amount and get the thing done. And there is a point where this breaks. Have you found sometimes in our sprint exercise And just to give a tiny bit of context, sprints are 45-minute sessions where we're trying to define and give a definition of done and then sprint towards doing that thing in a short amount of time. Have you found that that's working? Is there anything you'd tweak around it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that works really well for us when we're sitting next to each other or like in a similar space. I'd be really curious to see how that plays out more async when we're maybe in different time zones. I think the kind of even putting a time constraint on how many sprints we do a day is also really good because I don't know about you, but with a lot of these tools, I feel compelled to do like a 10-day work week to a 4-day work week, and yet that might, I think, would definitely leave you prone to more rabbit holes as well. So although you might be working more and spending more with these tools, you're creating more opportunities for rabbit holes. You're neglecting a whole bunch of other things that support you in terms of relationships and health and things that are actually worth living for, and keeping that balance. So I think we've kind of, I think we've balanced it really well. We also even had a kind of positive time constraint on when we first decided to start working together, which was, all right, let's give ourselves maybe 3 months, and also like knowing how long that time frame should be. In fact, I think maybe you'll even remember when we first met each other, I suggested that, and I do this from time to time. When I meet someone, I feel like there's maybe some collaboration that wants to emerge there, or there's something that could be generated from us spending a bit more time together. I invite someone to spend 8 hours together, and that could be 1 hour every week for 8 weeks, or that could be 3 hours, do a couple 3-hour sessions. But that 8 hours I found was both short enough and long enough to really identify, is there actually something worth nurturing here? And we've kind of done that, and then increased the size and the length and the outlook of which we're doing that. As of today, we're looking at least until the end of the year to build the studio with a commitment of 25 hours a week. Give or take, depending on different seasons, and if maybe there's a festival we both want to go to, or there's summer where we want to go and enjoy life, or there's a really important part of the build that we need to go through here. Again, keeping that lifestyle balance seems to be a really important part of understanding what a positive constraint is as well, and knowing when to stop. So I think a big part of the positive constraint system is knowing when to stop and predetermining that as well. It reminds me a little bit of a book I read recently that was specifically dedicated like when to quit. And they talked about Muhammad Ali as one of the case studies, like arguably one of the greatest fighters that ever lived. However, he didn't know when to quit. And boxing is a pretty thankless sport in terms of if you don't quit early enough. And so it's very obvious when you didn't quit soon enough. And knowing when to, and also like quitting at the top is such a hard place to be, to decide, oh, this is where I step away, particularly if it's maybe like a sport or something that takes up a big part of your spirit. So the other example in this book was hiking Everest. So making the positive constraint before you go and do something is really important. Just like, we will summit Everest at this time, and if we don't reach this point by this time, we turn back. And so by making that decision before you get to having to make that decision, you've kind of already got a framework to decide from, as opposed to, we'll decide when we get there. And because you're already like, you're filled with adrenaline, you're halfway up the mountain, but you're maybe not making the most informed decision at that particular point in time. And so a lot around time.
I think it's really
another time-based positive constraint we could.
So a couple of things. What I realize is that, like, we're using the term positive constraints. The other way to frame this is protecting certain things. So a positive constraint that I've noticed for my attention is that I have no screens in the bedroom, and that is a mechanism for my attention and my sleep and all of these things, that if you didn't have that positive constraint, if you didn't have that protective mechanism, you would potentially spend more time on a screen, more time in ways that are not conducive to like preserving that attention and in effect your ability to make decisions. Time-based ones, I think that's like, for me, that's enough right now. I like the idea though of domain-based positive constraints. And what I mean by that is like I can spin my wheels on design, say on interface design, but I know that you're much better at that. So I've tried to make this positive constraint for myself, which is like I really like designing things. I think it's really fun. I think it's like the imaginative fun part of a lot of this. But I know that I can spend like 3 or 4 hours trying to get something just right, and instead giving it to someone who I believe has like better taste in these things is a really interesting way to look at that, to say, oh no, this domain is not something that I can produce good work in a reasonable amount of time, and so I'm just gonna ask for somebody else's help in this. Do you have any domains that you find, even if you like them, you would prefer
Yeah,
somebody
I
else
mean,
did them?
no, no. Rather ironically, design has been one of those ones that I like constrained myself. So I used to be an Apple user, and I found myself spending so much time on Adobe products, and I'm like, why am I spending hours pushing pixels? It does not feel like the highest order of life right now. So I decided to not buy another Apple MacBook or anything. So I'm on this like Lenovo tablet thing that the keyboard comes off, and I'm missing a couple of keys, and so I've given myself a hardware constraint so that I don't design. And yet the tools have shifted to a point where even with this like pared down tool, I can now still produce really good designs with some of these like online tools. But yeah, originally that was very much a domain based constraint. I was like, no, I want to focus on relationships. I want to focus on nurturing partnerships and on more of the strategy stuff. A lot of more of the, like the design thinking side of things, because it's really easy to get caught up in the visual aspects of design, but actually going back and properly understanding what should go into a design is even more important in a lot of instances. And even since we've been working, I've found I haven't quite been able to spend as much time as I would have liked on that design thinking side of things before getting stuck into like, oh, this is what it looks like. And so, yeah, figuring that out. So maybe that's a domain based constraint I can figure out this week. Like one of the ones I almost put on myself this week was to not use any Canva as like a tool constraint, which was a forcing function to find another tool or a better tool. I was finding I'm using Canva pretty sparingly for like in between bits, and it's kind of working, but not quite. So I was like, if I remove that tool from my toolbox, it forces me to explore what else is there. And I did start exploring other things, but as I was building in a sprint, these new tools I couldn't onboard quick enough. I was like, all right, I just went back to Canva.
Yeah, interesting.
Maybe we could try an agentless week. So let's go a week without like Claude and Kimi and all of that, and see
Oh
what we can see.
man. It's crazy. It sounds like when you say that, I'm like, wow, how? Like
I
what
think
would we be able to do?
we should definitely do that. I'm not sure if we do that this week, but maybe another week going forward,
We should do it.
where
It'd
maybe
be really
when
interesting.
our workload's not as so. Yeah, I'd really like that as a positive constraint.
And maybe the thing that we produce is just way better. Like
Yeah, yeah.
the yeah. This is a little tangent, so maybe I'll mention it and then we can parking lot it. But a skill that I have been trying to cultivate is how to think bigger. I read this article and shared it with you 3 weeks ago, and it was about boiling the oceans. This
Mm.
phrase like that would come up in especially tech conversations. It's like, all right, let's not try and boil the ocean. Like, let's not try and do everything right now. And these days, like, you can produce a ton. You can get a ton of work done. So the like flip side of let's not boil the ocean is like, let's boil the ocean. Let's do the thing that is crazy and just like build the whole thing. We can. I've been noticing it with Claude. I'll ask for a plan for something and it'll say like, oh, we need to do these things and this is a day's work and this is like a week and then this is a month. And I'll be like, okay, can you do it right now? And it will go and build it and it'll take like half an hour. So like
Mhm.
the planning of an AI of how to do these things is just that we can boil the ocean. Anyway, that could turn into a big long rant. But the point being, the skill that I'm trying to cultivate is how do I expand my thinking? How do I think about ventures and opportunities and relationships and time in this way where I'm not constrained by what used to be possible, and that we can actually just do the thing.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, there's this practice. I'm not sure if you've come across Peter Thiel in some of your explorations, but he famously had a process with his startup founders where he would spend time with them and like, what does your 10-year vision look like? All right, how do we do that in 6 months? And so it was really like compressing a vision and a forcing function for like, let's accelerate this. And this is the way a lot of the VC backed kind of startups emerged over the past decade with that kind of thinking. Like this idea of orders of magnitude. So, I can do something 2 times better. I can do something 10 times better. I can do things 100 times better, 1,000 times better. And, if you listen to Elon talk, he talks a lot about, orders of magnitude and how to think in that way is a really incredible practice. But I think, that's definitely some space to open up the aperture for bigger visions. So, where maybe sweet.
So I think we do a relatively good job. I think maybe a practice could be a positive constraint of we're not going to build this, and we spend, we give ourselves the freedom to dream about it. Because I have this thing where like we'll talk about something and then I'm like, I'm going to build that. I'm going to figure out how to build that. And sometimes I really can, and it's like, wow, this is a crazy world that we live
Yeah,
in.
I think we have 6 ventures on the go, and even yesterday we are like, we should probably cap it at that. And then I was like, yeah, but 8's such a nice number, and we're only 2 away from that. At least maybe that could be our first cohort of season of ventures to focus on for at least the next few months. Maybe we could explore, this idea of like a longer term vision, like a 5, a 10, maybe a 10-year, even just the idea of a 10-year outlook right now is kind of crazy. At least something that maybe it comes more from inside rather than outside, but it's like, where do you want to be in 10 years? And if so, like, what could we do in the next 6 months to move towards that? How's that sound? Maybe it's something that we could share next week.
That sounds good. Let's share that next week.
All right. What should we call it? We should like the positively constrained future. No. That's like that's terrible. Like,
well, when we talk about this, what I'm thinking is like, what world do we want to live in? What way do we want to spend our time when it comes to like, let's constrain this specifically to the domain of work or like giving back in some way. Like, how do we want to be spending and what small thing could we do now to build that habit? Yeah. So sorry, I can see you're still in thought. I'll pause.
No, I was going to say, let's maybe constrain the divisions to one of 3: abundance of time, abundance of resources, or abundance of relationships, and bonus points if you can incorporate all 3.
Nice. I like that. Okay, so the directions that I want to move in now is still on this deep dive. We've got feature sets, which would be interesting to talk about, but there's a beautiful natural segue into an AMA question that I have written here.
So, all right, let's segue to AMA then. But I feel like we should have actually set a positive constraint on the positive constraint deep dive. Like we've got this many minutes to talk about the deep dive positive constraint.
That's a good idea. Maybe we should. So I have this with my phone as well. I am trying to minimize my screen time. So every time I go on my phone these days, I set a timer, and I have that many minutes to do the thing, which ends up being a fun game because I get to.
It's a great game, but I think you saw that thing I sent you from the Japanese researcher this week, right? So years and years people have been trying to figure out to reduce screen time on phones and give people a break. And this one designer, in fact, I should have put this in the news thing at the start, but this designer designed this big fat cat that just shows up on your screen every like 45 minutes and just like lounges around, taking over your entire screen. In fact, we should see if we can figure that out for our next podcast. If we can just get a cat that wanders on, and for 5 minutes you can't interact with the screen because it's like you can't see what's behind the cat.
That's going to be really boring for our listeners.
Yeah, we'd have to like talk around the cat.
Immediately where I'm going is maybe we could have I don't know if Riverside supports this. If it supports backgrounds, we could have a cat that walks around in the background. Anyway, fantastic idea. Hopefully we can link in the show notes to this fat cat that you can put on your screen every 45 minutes.
Let's
Um,
definitely put it in China.
all right. The AMA question that I want to ask here is if you had to only ship one product this year, if you had to only build one thing this year, what would it be and why?
Like based on what we've already built, or based on what we might possibly build.
Given the positive constraint conversation, I think we should constrain it to what we've already
What we've already
built.
built. Like and I think this is also part of the part of why I'm saying this is the like loss aversion fallacy piece. But I've spent the better part of last year thinking about land and thinking about libraries and how do you bring more intelligence to land ownership and or land stewardship even over ownership. And so yeah, if there's one project I want to carry forward, it would definitely be land library and this product within it that we're building, land book, that really supports every landowner or every transaction of someone buying a piece of land, having so much more information to work with. Basically, anyone that buys a piece of land, the learning curve is super steep in the first 5 years. So anything that will save time, save cost, and improve decisions on that land, I just seen have such huge implications. And then I also see like a future where if you've got a number of neighbors that are using these layers of intelligence, actually starting to work more collaboratively and being deciding, for instance, like, hey, it actually makes sense for us to take down these fences to increase the roaming range of various wild animals or animals in our land so that everyone benefits. And so you end up with landscapes actually starting to shift and how we think about them. And then you scale that up to the region and just there's so many land decisions that should really be made on a regional scale, not on an individual scale, not on a governmental scale. It's kind of this really nice piece in between. There's a incredible group of ecologists and scientists that really believe that if we like one of the best ways we can start making decisions as a society moving forward is this perspective of bioregions. So not making decisions purely based in cities, because cities are basically disembodied centers of commerce, but they're so disconnected from the environmental boundaries in which we live within. And if we started making decisions in each of these bioregions, and I definitely see a vision where libraries play a really crucial part in that. So every bioregion could have one of these really, and not like a stale fuddy-duddy library filled with stacks of books, but a library that is filled with different textures and different objects from the natural landscape and invite contribution and invite curiosity and wonder and exploration and share tools about how to go out into the landscape. I was really inspired by this story of a 10-year-old Japanese boy who was so interested in butterflies, and his parents gave him the tools to explore this. He ended up doing groundbreaking global research on it, and he's one of the leading butterfly researchers globally right now. I think he's 12 years old now, but still, like he's gone so into it, and talk about like an abundant future, like more of those spaces. I see that being so many things growth for that.
Yeah.
Don't get me
Remind
started.
me.
What about you?
No, it's fantastic. It reminds me of this conversation I had with a wonderful guy, Ed, who lives in the UK. And the way that he was framing it is like in the future, hopefully we will trade an abundance of our passions. And I love that phrase.
So good.
This little boy is passionate about butterflies. Like, there's not that many people that want to go and work at a call center, but there are lots of people that have like a really specific, weird thing that they're interested in. And only some people right now are bringing that into the world. I think everybody has something that they're weirdly interested in and should pursue that.
Abundance of weird. I love that.
It's a weird.
What a great future that looks like. More weirdos fully expressing their weirdness.
Fully expressing their humanness, yeah. The one thing, constraining it to the things that we've already started to build or built, the one thing for me is Nature Club. And specifically, it's because, so we've got this vision of that we can create this space for people to find ways to spend time in nature and to find hidden gems and to be brought into nature. The other part that it really lights me up about this is that it is an avenue for people to generate more income for themselves. So like the way that we've set this up is to have it so facilitators, instead of going and having to facilitate something at a venue, they could facilitate something in a nature venue at a beach, taking people for a hike to a waterfall, something like that. And I like this for multiple reasons. It's the like enabling people to do more, to like get outside more in nature. It's enabling people to generate income for themselves. And the other thing is, I spend so much time, like selfishly, I spend so much time looking for cool things, finding cool adventures. Like, you've introduced me to a few like really interesting, amazing, like magical places. And I tend to find myself either seeking those places or becoming friends with people who are also seeking these like weird, interesting, lovely places. And so creating a way for sharing those things. And then the knock-on effects of all of those, I think, are really massive. The like spending time in nature the research shows that it's more effective than doing any of these other things, than meditating, than doing breath work, just like literally going and spending time in nature, because we are animals. And when you contrast that with people being in cities, it's just, I can feel the difference. I think I'm relatively sensitive to kind of the energy of a place, but I've spent time in New York. I go there for a holiday and I see my friends, and all of a sudden there's like this, my body is like at this intense frequency, and it's hard sometimes to have clear thoughts in that way. But then you go and spend a couple of hours in nature and it immediately brings you back to this place of being kind of in touch with yourself and in touch with other people. It's just a nicer way to live. So yeah, that would be my...
Yeah, man. I'm so glad you're standing for Nature Club, because it's definitely one of the ones I'm really excited by as well. And I mean, the implications of it growing are actually huge. I I went to Japan a couple of years ago to meet a bunch of the leading researchers on the forest therapy movement. And so what they've done in Japan is they've set up a network of these specific healing forests where you go and you take a hike through the forest, and they use it as a way to improve health. And kind of what they figured out is the baseline, the absolute minimum that every human needs is at least 2 hours a week in nature. And what that does is it improves your mood, it lowers your stress hormones, and it boosts your immunity. So those three broad categories are just huge. However, when I got to Japan, I noticed that the infrastructure was super uninvested in. I was like, well, what does it look like when you have a network of these, and this seems to be the place all around the world, right? You've got big, beautiful national parks, but the infrastructure that supports these places is super centralized, and, you have maybe like a fuddy-duddy welcome center, and there isn't much that like really invites more. And even just the idea of building little wooden platforms that are immersed in nature for people to meditate or do yoga or do tea ceremonies or any number of these things. Like, I'm just in the process of finishing off building a little tea hut in the rice field here. Just opens up all of these possibilities. And so I see that as the other side of Nature Club as well. So every event that comes through Nature Club, we could then fund not only the ecological restoration of each area, but we could actually help develop these small, low impact infrastructure pieces that make it more easy for people to host things in nature, and it not be overly commercial in a way that is exclusionary. Yeah, so super excited by that as an outlook. I also see Nature Club as something that, as more and more time becomes available in a more abundant future, like, people don't know how to even be in nature anymore. Most people have a huge reduction in the ability to smell, like almost 20 or 30%, because they don't spend time in nature just smelling things, which it sounds ridiculous, but actually, like, it's one of the more beautiful things we can do is you go around and smell. Like, when was the last time you actually, this is a good question for you, because I feel like you did it very recently, but when was the last time you actually smelled a flower and then some other random piece of nature?
3 hours ago.
And then what was the random piece of nature you smelled?
On my morning walk, I collected some flowers and I smelled them, and I noticed that the frangipanis, different colors of them, have different smells, like really distinctly different smells. The other thing that I smelled was, but I didn't intentionally smell this, so I don't know if it counts, but I was walking past like a pile of earth. Somebody had dug a big hole and there was a big pile of earth, and I was like, what is that nice smell? And then I looked over and I realized that it was just like clay, basically. It was just an earthy smell.
Yeah,
But I
totally.
didn't go and like smell a different thing. Uh,
Intentionally.
it, intentionally. Here's a
Char-
challenge for anyone that's listening. Yeah. I'm gonna go and intentionally smell it and smell something, and I'd like to put it out there to anybody who
suggest something to tie to.
sure suggest something for me to smell, and I want to extend the invitation if you anywhere to smell 3 different objects, and if anybody asks what you're doing, tell them that you're getting in touch with your sense of smell and invite them to smell 3 objects throughout their day. And River, I'd like to extend the invite to you too.
Easy done. I will say, if you want like to upgrade your smelling capacity, closing your
Mm.
eyes while you smell and actually doing 3 deep breaths, like into like the bottom of your belly. That's like actually how you really start actually smell. And I've noticed
Mm.
a big difference. Like when you close your eyes and smell versus when you keep them open, you end up with a very different sense of there actually.
Mm.
One
What?
of the things I like to do is I smell tea before I serve it. And I don't know, like I always see dragons when I smell these teas.
Cool.
Yeah. Anyways,
Anyway, we digress.
we digress. We digress. I have an AMA from actual humans. If you want to go on.
Please. Yes.
Well, I mean, this is only our second show, so I did put it out to my Instagram. I introduced what we were doing, and then I asked, what's worth talking about, and I got a bunch of responses. And one of them here is kind of like a hybrid from a couple of friends, Sean and Justin. Justin wanted to know like what are some definitions of abundance, and Sean extended a little bit further with how do humans transition from a life of work to freedom, both economically and purpose-wise. And I felt these two kind of like hiding quite nicely.
Got some initial thoughts. Maybe you want to.
Yeah, please go with
So
your initial.
definitions of abundance, I'm gonna leave for a second, but to just realize that this is a huge question and maybe the question of how do we transition. And just a couple of initial thoughts is that people generally, we're very good at change. We're very good at adapting, but we're also quite opposed to change. And I think it's because it takes so much time and energy. I think personal change takes a lot of time and energy from an individual. And so I think that like, how do we transition is going to be a big focus, and specifically, how do we transition to a purpose? How do we keep taking purpose into the future? I think is going to be a focus for a lot of people, or should be a focus. And I hope that more and more services come out of people in this way, like looking for purpose. A lot of people are purpose driven through their work, but in a world where that is not necessary, I think that purpose is still going to be a massive thing, and having people focused on solving this problem for humans is going to need a lot of time and attention, and not only big brains going into this, but also people learning to trust themselves and answer these questions for themselves. Like, what does purpose look like? Not from what something else tells you, but from what you care about or what you believe your purpose should be. I think the economics question, I think about this quite a lot because we have all of these systems that are built on economic models, and specifically we have an economy that is largely built on debt and financing, and that falls over, corrects, changes, doesn't go with the models that we've created if you don't keep producing more and more. And on a finite planet, it's very hard to have things compounding indefinitely. It's impossible, actually. And we have a world that right now sort of works, and it works at least in the short term and the medium term. But when we have these like big market corrections, it's just that there's a gap between what we expected to have and what we actually have. And I think that the whole model is going to need to change, especially if we think about some of these things, about the value of some of the inputs for these models going to zero, like energy, intelligence, and all of these things. Yeah, it's a little bit roundabout. Maybe you want to take a look at the
Yeah, sure.
abundance.
So, I've already talked about at least one of the ways I think of the definitions of abundance, and that's abundance of time, abundance of resources, abundance of relationships, and I think abundance of spirit is also really important. Kind of the abundance of spirit is not necessarily like spiritual practice, but that feeling from within. It's like that abundance of like energy and spirit that moves you in a positive way. And then in terms of transitioning, I actually think there's a lot. There's this idea of like ancient futures, and I think there's actually a lot of insight from the freedom that the cultures that came before us had. And a large part of that was due to the fact that they actually had relatively small, local, resilient networks that were self-sustaining with a relatively small amount of resources, but input from everyone. So I actually think we're going to go from this large, interconnected global economic system, which is clearly quite fragile and brittle when you have things like war and resource shortages affecting so much, back to more of these smaller, little, local, resilient centers, and kind of like an abundance of each of them being like quite unique in their own way. And I would say the difference between maybe the past and the future is our ability to travel across them as well, and to be able to plug in a way which isn't just purely touristic. It's like you can go in to a new place and still be of service quite easily, knowing that you being of service might actually just be like spending time with people and the relational layer. I certainly know that the time that I spend in Asia, it feels like there's kind of like an abundant sense of relationships around, and just investing more time with people here, just like it feels abundant. There's a certain spirit that is gained from it, and it's not that it has to be like economically tied, but just spending time together. The Amish have kind of gotten this well as well. They have the whole barn building experience where everyone, they have like 150 people come and build a barn for one of the neighbors, and then maybe they do that 3 or 4 times a season, but everyone gets serviced by everyone else, and there's like not an economic exchange in that, but there's this abundance of relationships that creates this abundance of material. Yeah, so that's where I think we're moving towards, and there's already parts of the world that very much operate like that. I think they will stay like that, and I think some technological pieces will be able to support that, but also a lot of these things work without high tech. So yeah, that's what I kind of see quite clearly. Anything jump out at you on that?
Since I have an open question that we don't need to go into right now, but is like you talk about the relational layer. My question is, what are the other layers, maybe the technological layer, the financial layer, but I like the idea of kind of being able to separate out these different parts and see the invisible, see the value in the invisible things, because there's so much value in human connection. There's so much value in lots of things, but we've only got a metric for measuring some things.
Yeah. I mean, I put a lot into abundance of resources. I'd say that is a lot of that plugs in there. There's you could argue that it would be nature, like abundance of nature, but at the moment we still kind of look at them as resources. So I'd say the one definition that doesn't quite sit with me is that resources piece. It's kind of like at the moment a catch-all, but somehow it frames it still frames resources as something to extract, as opposed to something that is I don't know, generative or reciprocal, or something that regenerates, as opposed to just for our use. Yeah. So I don't know. We'll see. Curious to hear other people's kind of distinctions and definitions as well. Like what I'm hearing out of like the Moonshots podcast, for instance, is some like a lot around the abundance of intelligence, and a lot around the abundance of this idea of even lifespan, like abundance of time around extending life. But I don't see a lot around like abundance of what to necessarily do with that extra time. And I mean, I do remember reading David Sinclair's book, The Lifespan, and he's the guy that's doing a lot of this research on longevity. And in fact, even this week, they're starting clinical trials on humans. So within a couple of months, we'll know how effective the Yamanaka factors are at extending lifespan. But he talks about if you live to 150, the more compelling implication for him was, what kind of a relationship do you have with your great grandchild? And so for the first time in human history, you can have these kind of extended family networks. And then what does that look like? And then if you pair that with the abundant future where our time isn't spent on work, but actually in relationship, what does that kind of look like again? And the Western world has fragmented so far from connection. They've gone the other way to individualism. how does that come back around? And so all you can do at that point is connect and spend time with each other. Yeah, the abundance of relationships, I think, is a super fascinating piece.
It's going to be, I feel like we often spend time and energy, whether we realize it or not, on the bottlenecks. That came out a little bit.
Your bottleneck was bottlenecked.
So yeah, it reminds me of when I was learning about voice agents, just how the different kind of inputs and outputs. Anyway, I won't go into the rabbit hole of agent voice clarity, but yeah, we focus on bottlenecks, and the bottleneck for humanity a lot of the time has been like, how do we get enough food and shelter and like these types of things. Like, if those are not bottlenecks anymore, what kind of bottlenecks do we then look at? Potentially human connection will be the thing that we define as success if we're in a world where we don't need to be good at, say, growing rice. Then what do you have everybody aiming towards? What do you have everybody trying to do? Like right now we have influencers who will rent a Bugatti to look like they have money because money is a proxy for being intelligent, successful, being able to get what you want, blah, 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 blah. Maybe that looks completely different in a world where everybody can have a Bugatti because it's really easy to produce those things, but not everybody knows how to connect really well. And that's what we'll spend our time figuring out how to do. How to tell stories, how to like really lean into the animal that we are as humans, because we talk about like having a prehistoric brain with a technology that is not designed for this brain that like looks for. There's this thing with humans specifically, that when you're having a conversation, when you're in a group conversation, you'll notice that every kind of 12 to 15 minutes, there's a bit of a natural lull in a conversation. And apparently that is the amount of time that it took for a woolly mammoth to run from the horizon where you couldn't see it to where you were. So we naturally developed this ability to kind of like pause every 12 or 15 minutes to look around to make sure that there were no woolly mammoths running towards our group.
The woolly mammoth pause. That is brilliant.
Yeah.
And ironically, they bring it back woolly mammoths.
That's what I've heard. So maybe we should focus on the woolly mammoth pause.
Colossal. So I wonder if that is still a relevant pause. Crazy. Wow. Yeah. I guess we could call that the woolly mammoth positive constraint.
Sorry, got to go check for danger.
Yeah, I guess that'd be pretty hard to miss. What's your next question? Do you have
my next question is, I've got two. Well, I've only got one. One of them is show notes attribution game show is the note that I've got here. And this is the Einstein said. So like talking about the woolly mammoths thing, Einstein said this about woolly mammoths, obviously. This is a game show. This is a game that I'd like to play at some point where we misattribute sayings, and then either, I don't quite know how it works, either somebody else has to fact check us, or an agent fact checks us, or we fact check each other, and we make them sayings that are kind of obvious enough that maybe we'd know them.
Okay, so you want to play that now?
I want to play that next week, so I'm just teeing it up now.
Okay. So next week we need to come up with a quote, and it would be misattributed.
Yeah. But so you're going to say, no, like it's a real quote. So it'll be something like, I have a dream. And then I'll say, yeah, Elvis Presley had this speech called I Have a Dream. And you got to be like, no, that's bullshit, actually.
Man, it's incredible how that quote, it's like voice and like intonation changed in my mind as soon as you said that.
Can you do it?
I don't want to muck it up. But also like who the quote was given to, like, wow. I certainly don't want to take a quote like that and wow. But energetically, wow, it shifts so strongly.
Okay, my real question for right now is, and it comes back to this conversation that we're having about the Amish, and maybe you can tell the story that you were telling me the other day. But the question is, if AI disappeared overnight, but you still had the tools that we built, would you be ahead or behind? Would you say that you're better off having had the tool and building what we've built, or would you have preferred to use the time to, would you prefer to not have these AI tools?
Ooh.
Will you start with giving context for the...
Yeah, sure. So two of the podcasts I actually really loved listening to recently. One's called The Great Simplification, and the other one's called The Great Humbling. And both of them have a similar kind of outlook and thesis, which is basically we exist in a point in human history where we leverage so much energy from oil, and that we think it'll last forever, but it actually it won't. And at the moment, we can produce things very cheaply, but that might not necessarily always be the case. So what's worth building now while we have access to cheap energy and cheap resources that will support us moving forward? And one of the examples that was actually given to illustrate this on The Great Humbling, I believe, was this idea of how a lot of the Amish communities work. And the Amish are very selective with the technology that they adopt in their cultures. And so a lot of them actually work with wind-powered technology. So they have windmills that capture energy from the wind and compress them into these gas tanks. And then they use a whole bunch of different tools with gas-powered tools. So they have gas-powered building tools. They have gas-powered sewing machines. They have a whole bunch of these gas-powered things. And so the insight is it's very easy to make these tools now, but also in the future when this energy isn't readily available, these gas-powered tools will still work. However, how many of the tools that we're building today, like right now, that are built on AI are going to continue to work potentially without the fuel economy powering them. And you could make some projections into, well, with the movement towards solar and battery tech and all of that is getting there, but still what underpins the solar industry is access to cheap fuel that allows us to mine the minerals and process the goods. So it's an industry that, if you look at the whole life cycle of it, is a little bit more complicated. I think a bunch of the things that we're building are directionally great. And so even if they start to, let's take Nature Club, for instance, right? It's something that encourages and invites people. And I really believe that people are actually just looking for more invitations, but more invitations to go and spend time in nature in more compelling ways. And by making that more straightforward for hosts and for people to come, more of those behaviors and habits will be formed. And so, and there's such a lack of imagination for what you can actually do in nature, like what you could build. And, there's this guy out of the States and he builds these human-sized spider webs. He's called Charlie's Web on Instagram. And, he'll build 12-story tall, paracord rope installations, which give you such a different experience of a tree, because you can basically crawl all the way up this tree. And so I'd see even if the Nature Club infrastructure doesn't work because, let's say we can't use mobile phones anymore, for instance, at least the people that have been touched on what's possible to do in nature and how to interact with it, that could still remain. Similarly, we're at a point on land knowledge where there's so much knowledge from the past that has been lost generationally. And in a relatively short period of time, I think we can invite in right relationship and right stewardship of land with a bunch of this very dense digital stuff, digital knowledge, but then making the interface for it really quite straightforward and helping landowners, for instance, identify what a bioindicator is on their land to signify, oh, this is healthy land. So an example here that I came across recently is the firefly. The firefly is an incredible bioindicator because it tells you the quality of the soil, the quality of the water, and relatively low light pollution. So if if the firefly is around, you're living in a healthy environment. And so that takes a huge amount of complex information and distills it down to one very simple signal. Yeah, so that's where I'm at. But again, building with AI tools necessitates more technology, not less technology sometimes. But I feel like what we're still trying to solve for is one of the simple technological, elegant tools and solutions that keep us from spending more time online less time online as opposed to more time online, which seems to have been the search and social media era. We're trying to grab everyone's attention. We don't want to grab people's attention. We want to create tools that keep them offline.
Yeah. Help people.
What are your thoughts on that?
Claim their time back.
Great question,
Yeah, I mean, to answer the question directly, I think it's much better to have the things because we can imagine them. We can imagine futures that we can build. We can spend this time expanding what we believe is possible and then go and try to build those things. I think there's this pipeline of imagination, conversation, prototyping, testing, building, that this is how we create things in the world. And even just like AIs being able to generate an image of something, because we're such visual creatures, being able to generate an image of what you might like see as an interior design thing, layout, enables a lot of people, a lot more people who don't have this inherent skill to be able to visualize that, be able to create more and be able to kind of explore more. Real question behind the question to me is like, what is, given this frame of we have this short amount of time potentially, what things are worth building? I think we're directionally correct. We're building things that should bring people into being humans more, bring them back into relationship with each other. I'm always trying to look around the corner to like say, all right, this is where we are now. What is this going to look like very shortly? And the kind of trends that I'm noticing is that people are searching for meaning. They're searching for connection. There are these on the other side of this, these troubles in the world, climate change, these like big things, too much trash. There's a lot of pollution. There are all of these things that we kind of need to get ahead of the curve on this stuff. And I think we're changing the way that people are thinking, hopefully, about their relationship, say through Nature Club, their people's relationship with nature. And that has a knock-on effect. It's like Steve-O and David Attenborough, both amazing stewards of land, and the way that they go about that isn't to like go and set up all of these restoration projects, or they have, but I would argue that their biggest impact is the impact that they have on how people connect with and think about animals, and also realizing that we are animals. And there's this, I think it's in the book Super Intelligence, and they talk about AI and AGI, and that the best guess we have for how a super intelligence might interact with humans is how humans treat pets or animals. And that connects back to this idea that you were talking about maybe a couple of weeks ago, the way that people treat the way a society treats the animals is a good indicator of how intelligent that society is. Am I getting that right?
Yeah. I mean, you can look at there's this idea that you can look at the health of the community based on the health of its animals and how it treats its animals in relational context of it. So you look at a lot of Western countries, and although individually they look after their animals, potentially really well, a lot of them have like anxious attachment disorders, and these animals, although they might have like a healthy coat, but the fact that they're living in an isolated existence means that they're actually not healthy, and they mimic the kind of health of the owners, whereas parts of Asia where animals are a little bit more free range, and they may have owners that they run around and look after themselves by and large, and they go wherever they want. And I just feel such a different spirit of animals that kind of live that way. And then to me, it just speaks volumes on the cultures that then create space for that to be the case. Yeah. All right. I have
On that note,
one question. So this one. So the first one was from actual humans, and this one is from Kimi, who is not a human, but it felt like quite an interesting question, which is, what are you building right now that felt impossible 12 months ago? Which certainly even as a question that helps frame like how abundant things are right now already presently. I mean, when I first read that question, I was like, pretty much everything. And like everything that I think we're building right now, both in terms of technical capacity, but also its potential impact on the physical world, like felt impossible to do 12 months ago without huge teams and huge budget, which then like overly complicates and then creates these huge timelines. So yeah, I'd say pretty much everything that we're building right now would feel more like they'd all individually almost feel like a 5-year build with long, lengthy timelines and big teams that need to kind of build them out.
Yeah. I would say everything, especially for the two of us. We moved pretty quickly. We're interested in a lot of different areas. We're good at connecting ideas and connecting with people and kind of bringing these things together. My personal ability to go and learn how to write code. I tried to learn to write code like 3 or 4 times because I think it's I love building things and I think it's an important skill. I didn't. It's as simple as that. We rewind 9 months, and I was tinkering with AI trying to I ran a couple of tests. I tried to build a website with an AI. It gave me a bunch of code. It didn't work. I went, all right, whatever. Not working. Came back 3 months later. It could build a front end, like a UI that was clickable and would change screens. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. You fast forward another 2 months and it can get a lot of the pieces right. It was enough to go and make me understand databases, API keys, and a bunch of kind of building blocks. And then we look at where we are now, which basically build fully functional production code. My ability to do this is, it's there, which is incredible to me. But then you also look at people who could already build things, and you look at the teams at OpenAI or at Anthropic, who are putting all of this energy into building code generating agents so that they can do recursive self-improvement and eventually get to a model that is. So now they're using agents to build the next agents, and this only speeds up. It's wild. So yeah, everything that we're building, I couldn't have imagined it would be possible. And then you look at what other people are building as well, like people setting up physical stores that are run by an AI. That stuff's just wild, and it's only getting faster. Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah, I mean, I think just what comes up for me is, although we have the ability to build a lot more and a lot faster, the speed of which is not a substitute for quality and not a substitute for building, kind of what's important. And I know that even when we first started talking, we were like, oh, let's build 100 ventures in 3 years. The idea of building 100 ventures 3 years ago, even 6 months ago, seemed like a bit of a stretch. But now that we're 4 months in, we've built 6. We'll only get quicker and quicker. That 100 feels very reachable. And not even just in the terms of volume, but also in the sense of the quality and the kind of impact and balance of them. We're not focusing on building a bunch of noisy things. It's what are the things that are really providing signal and really worthwhile. Yeah, again, towards that abundant future. But our hearts know are possible. It's not our heads, but it's more of the heart stuff. So yeah, I'm excited to continue working with these tools and make the impossible possible in a really beautiful way.
I got a potential positive constraint for us. It's to do with feature sets that we didn't really hit, and I don't quite know how we test this, but the positive constraint is, can we build, or can we make it so that what we build solves one problem, or has one feature, or a maximum of 3? Can we give ourselves a positive constraint in that way? It becomes clear that as you can build all of the features.
How would you define a feature?
Yeah, well, this is the thing. Or maybe it's not a feature set wise, but it's solves one problem. I think we could do a better job at getting really specifically to because I see a world in which
the fat cat,
the fat cat.
The fat cat is a one feature thing.
The fat cat, what it does is it stops you from using your computer, right? In one sentence. What I'm thinking is we have the potential to make all of these things with all of these features, but the ability of a startup to be successful is often finding that product market fit, finding that thing that it does, what. It's always in copy, you're trying to answer this question, so what? Why do I care about this thing? So I guess the directional challenge is can we aim our things at answering that or doing that thing? Because eventually, and I see this happening in a relatively short order, is that we won't necessarily interact with these things on screens. It'll be I want to get this thing done, and it will happen. I will interact with it, and maybe I'll text something and say, hey, can you do the thing? And the thing will happen. Or I want clean clothes. The features of that is that they get washed and dried and folded and in my cupboard, and it might be a robot that has done that. But the thing that I want is my clothes clean, you know? So the invitation here is the bringing the feature set more into a job to be done for each of our ventures and for anything that we're building.
Challenge accepted. And let's come up with one feature that felt impossible 12 months ago. Just to do that one thing.
Right.
That sounds like a prime competition.
Oh, yeah, good.
Thank you
I'm
for your time,
excited.
sir.
All right, I will
Episode 2.
see you
Done.
shortly. Done
Thanks
and
for listening,
dusted.
guys.
Ciao,
I
ciao.
feel like we should reward listeners that make it to the end. I don't know how yet, though. Let's figure it out. Maybe some Easter eggs, some song, or some little. Yeah, oh, look, there's a little wavy man up there.
Yeah, well, what about just invite listeners to make it to the end with a special word that they can use at checkout for any of our projects?
Ooh, I do like that. Yeah. Or a special invite link to one of our projects.
Yeah, but the thing is, we have to be able to do it here and not put it in the show notes.
Ooh.
You know what I mean?
Well, we could just delete it from the show notes, right?
Yeah, but
We need to make it more abstract. So it's like, it's something that doesn't type out well, but if you hear it, you get it. It's like it's a human code.
But you're assuming that people are going to go and like read the transcript. I'm just thinking like the little blurb. Because anyway, I want something that's like, yeah, maybe a phrase of the episode. Doggo.
Okay,
All right.
exactly. We got a Lulu here. It's time to go. Ciao, brother.
All right.
Until
Ciao,
the
ciao.
next. Ciao. Bye bye.